as I found out, you lose a lot of friends and a lot of support when you speak out against one of the parties. You know, it's okay. And I was, you know, everybody's hero on the left, and while I was just challenging George Bush and the Republicans. But as soon as I saw the Democrats for what they were, then I started challenging them, then I lost a lot of support. So I really appreciate your support. You know, but thank you. You just, part of the problem in this country, so many people worry about what people are going to think of them if they say the truth. And you just got to, and if you say the truth, then you just have to separate the wheat from the chaff. And that's what happened. Now we know who we can trust and who are just basic partisan hacks. And so it's a good thing when anything gets discussed. You know, when I went to Crawford, Texas in August of '05, there was no national debate. I know you were having it here in Wisconsin. I know that many of you were against the war, against invasion and occupation, and you demonstrated it. You were out on the streets. You wrote letters to your representatives. You did whatever you could to stop it. And so I know there was a debate locally, but there was no debate nationally. And many people didn't know there was an anti-war movement. Many people felt that the war was wrong and they were against it. They didn't know how to express it. And in August of '05, when the National Press Corps was there, actually covering someone who disagreed with George Bush, who outlined the lies and the reasons we should not have gone to the war, the reasons my son should still be alive, and hundreds of thousands of other people. It was the first time many people saw it. When we went on our Caravan for Humanity and Accountability, I was on national news all over talking about impeachment. It was like a foreign subject to everybody. You know, not everybody who was listening, especially people who have been listening to Democracy Now!, reading The Progressive, listening to Air America, you had heard that word before. But it was the first time people on, you know, regular America who don't have the time to seek out the truth heard the word impeachment. And it was the first time many people who interviewed me had heard the word impeachment. So it's really good to talk about these things. Let's talk about how the two-party system is fundamentally corrupt. How the two-party, and when I say two-party, I want to say two-party. You know, really, in many ways, we only have one party in this country. And people say, Cindy, do you need a third party? My answer is all, well, a second party would be nice. You know, let's put first things first. And so George Martin stopped me over in the beer garden, and this, you know, Wisconsin's great. Two of my favorite things are beer and cheese. So, you know, this is like my Mecca, my paradise here. And so George Martin said, Cindy, you have to understand that the Democrats here in Wisconsin are already on the left, and I understand that. I understand that, but that's not true nationally. And that's not true with the leadership in our party. The leadership in our party, the Democratic Party, I shouldn't say our party because I'm not a Democrat anymore, but the leadership in the Democratic Party are not on the left. They don't represent true progressive values. What they do is represent the status quo, and they try to maintain the status quo and protect the status quo. Well, the status quo does not foster peace. The status quo does not foster, it does not foster an acceptance of everybody's religion, everybody's culture, everybody's color, everybody's sexual persuasion. No, the status quo, I believe, is something that we should tear down, not protect. Then I had a really interesting conversation with somebody from your NBC affiliate. It was an interview, and he said, well, what would you say to your critics? He goes, you know, not me, but maybe somebody would say that what you do by wanting the troops to come home is anti-American. And so he goes, what would you say to those people? And I said, I would say that I'm a mother whose son was killed in Iraq, and all I want to do is to save lives, and that's what I'm doing. He goes, but what would you say if they said, well, that's anti-American? I said, well, is peace an anti-American value? You know, is peace anti-American? If peace is anti-American, then yes. If that's the definition, then I am anti-American. So what you're going to see tonight on NBC is Cindy Sheehan saying, yes, I am anti-American. He said, do you have anything else to say? I said, yes. If you feature that, you have to precede it with what I said about peace. You know, I know about sound bites. So, and we have to understand that peace is not just an absence of war. During the 90s, during the Clinton regime, more Iraqis were killed than George Bush has managed to kill. They were killed with the US UN-led sanctions. They were killed with the weekly bombings that Clinton was doing to strategic targets that was killing Iraqis. They've been killed by the depleted uranium that contaminated that region after the first Gulf War. And there's a statistic that says about 1 million to 1.5 million Iraqis were killed during the US UN-led sanctions. But you talk to Iraqi people, they say, no, that's just the amount of children that were killed. And so here we were in America during the Clinton years thinking we were at peace. No, maybe children in America weren't getting killed, and maybe not very many American children were being killed during the Clinton regime, but children all over the world were being killed. And we thought we were a nation at peace. No, peace is not an absence of war. Peace is where the economy is there to serve the people, not the other way around. Peace is where we only have a military that's used for defense and not wars of aggression to line the pockets of the war machine. Peace is where anybody who wants to can have a good paying job with health benefits and belong to a union if they choose to. Peace is where anybody from kindergarten to college can get a good quality free education. Peace is where people in their communities can feel safe and taken care of. And that's never going to happen when the war machine runs our country. We will never have true peace. And then we not only see this war in the Middle East, this destabilization of the entire Middle East to fit all kinds of, scandalous agendas. But here in America, we seriously, and I don't want to borrow any nomenclature from Lou Dobbs, but there is a war on the middle class. When we don't have health care, when we don't have good jobs, when we don't have good education, we can't sustain a middle class, and we can only have democracy if we have a middle class. What we have now is a fascist oligarchy or a plutocracy where only a few people benefit from the resources and the work of Americans. We just got back from Amman, Jordan. I famously left the anti-war movement, left as being the face of the anti-war movement. And I wanted to go in a humanitarian direction. I wanted to help people who have been hurt by American imperialism, which is every one of you in here. Everybody in the world has been hurt by American imperialism. So that's a big job. There's a lot of things to do. And when George Bush commuted Scooter Libby's sentence without one peep from the Democratic leadership. That was 5 weeks after my retirement, and I said, I can't stop. I got to make sure these war criminals, these criminals against international law, against our Constitution, against anything it means to be human, I have to make sure they're impeached for what they've done. And that is a service to humanity. But what we saw in Jordan was devastating. Many people in America might not feel the pinch of American corporate military imperialism, but the people in the Middle East are sure feeling that pinch. Where there's 2 million refugees in Syria from Iraq. There's 1 million refugees in Jordan from Iraq. And these countries are still trying to absorb the refugees that have been pouring in there since 1947 when Israel occupied Palestine. So it's this destabilization. The refugee crisis is destabilizing the entire Middle East. And I don't think that people here in America know that we have brothers and sisters there who don't have even access to the education we have here, since George Bush's No Child Left Behind has made education a laughingstock. We're like number 47 in the world in education. They don't have jobs. They can't work, even to do the barest work that we do here in America. And if you still have a good union job or still have a good job, you're one of the few Americans that isn't having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet and just to pay for health care. So these people who have been not only killed, which is over 1 million Iraqis who have died as a result of George Bush's oil war and war for profit, but there are millions who have had to flee their homes. And have you heard one of our elected representatives talking about that? We have to stop the war to help the people of Iraq. Nobody says that. If they do say anything about the war, they say it's mismanaged, as if you could manage a war properly. So one of the ways that we will achieve true and lasting peace is if we realize that everybody in the world, not just white Christian Americans, deserve a basic standard of living. That everybody is valuable. That yes, we might not be having bombs dropping on us here in America, but bombs are dropping on our brothers and sisters in Iraq and Afghanistan. Whether there are bombs or insurgents' bombs or Al-Qaeda's bombs, people are being killed because we're occupying their country for no reason. And the people of Iraq want us out. People always say, Cindy, what would you do? I said, well, I'd bring the troops home immediately. Well, what would the people of Iraq do? You know what? They are the cradle of civilization. They invented language. They invented math. They invented engineering. And they tell me, you know what? We can take care of our own problems. And one of the problems is the American occupation. There was a little controversy at the breakout session when Matt Rothschild of the Progressive said that George Bush and Dick Cheney were mentally ill. And, it could, and I can see how that can offend people who work with mentally ill people, who have loved ones who are, and there's a wide range of mental illness, and maybe all of us can claim a little piece of that pie. But however, I believe that George Bush is a sociopath, and I believe even though he's a willing puppet, he is a puppet of people much smarter and more devious and evil than even he is. So I don't want to disparage. I don't even want to link George Bush with mentally ill people because, we all love them and we know people like that. But these people, if greed for money if greed for power, if not caring about the least of us is a mental illness, these people need to be locked up because they are extremely ill. They are the most ill segment of our society. And we don't need an impeachment movement. We need an imprisonment movement. Now, many of you, including Midge Miller, were active in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And, you know, it took a long time. Too many people died. Too many people were hurt. Too many mothers were devastated. Too many families, Vietnamese and American, were hurt. And finally, our troops came home. You can't say they came home with their tail between their legs because they were sent there by cowards who had their tails between their legs. And they're using the same rhetoric. Oh, we can't slink home with our tails between our legs, you know, we can't lose another war. And the Democrats are not hammering this home, that this war was lost before we even invaded, that this is a neocon war, it is a Republican war, and the longer the Democrats pay for it, are in power without bringing our troops home, it's now a Democratic war. And they also have blood on their hands. Since January 4th, it's been their war also. But this is what we have to say, that we have to say there's no such thing as a good war. War is not good. War is never good. Nobody ever wins in war. That there's some cases where we have to defend ourselves, and that's the only legitimate reason for war. But the Democrats aren't courageously saying, you know, they're worried about it. They have to extend the occupation so they'll win the presidency and more seats in the House. If they stopped it tomorrow, it would be a freaking landslide because 75% of this country want our troops to come home. And not one of them says, well, you know, we have to prolong it so we can take back the White House. But that's really a shame about all the Iraqis and Americans who have to die in the process. We barely talk about our American soldiers that have been killed. We rarely, if ever, hear anybody talking about the innocent Iraqis who have been killed. So what do we do in the peace movement? We have to end this war in Iraq. There's no doubt about that. The troops have to come home. I hate even calling it a war. It's an illegal occupation. But the people of Iraq know that they've been at war with America for a dozen years now. You know, they feel the effects of the war. They think it's a war. But what we're doing is occupying a country illegally. And another thing is, if you occupy a country, one of your responsibilities is to the innocent civilians, to not kill them, to make sure that they have hospitals and doctors and education and food and water. We failed even in that regard. We're killing innocent civilians. Our first targets were hospitals and doctors and ambulances. And why isn't anybody from another country calling George Bush and Dick Cheney war criminals? Why aren't they prosecuted in The Hague? Why wasn't George Bush and Dick Cheney, why weren't they right next to Saddam Hussein when he was being tried for war crimes? For one thing, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and the rest of those, they were complicit in Saddam Hussein's war crimes. They gave Saddam Hussein the weapons that could kill the people of Iraq when the Saddam Hussein regime was in power. And when we supported them in their war against Iran, and we were supporting Iran with weapons too. And I was on the plane with a Republican yesterday. He said, Saddam does have weapons of mass destruction. They're going to find a large cache there one of these days. And he said if he had only let the inspectors in. So I enlightened him, I said, it would probably help if you turned off Fox News once in a while and found out the truth that the UN weapons inspectors were there saying he had not reconstituted his weapons and capability. And that's why we didn't get a second resolution in the Security Council. I said he had no weapons of mass destruction, and if he still had some, we knew it because we gave them to him. We sold them to him, and we kept the receipts. The only thing we didn't know, obviously, is where he kept them. So one of the ways of dismantling the war machine is something that I met some people here who do counter recruitment. We mothers, I'm going to talk to the mothers now. So mothers, put on your listening devices. I don't know what that would be. If you're hard of hearing, I guess it's called a hearing aid. But mothers, one of the reasons I'm so detested by many people is because I didn't just take my gold star and Casey's insurance money and go away and shut up. And mothers in America are supposed to be like our democratic leadership and protect the status quo. And what's the status quo in America? Mom, country, and apple pie. And we are supposed to willingly give our children to the war machine so they can kill them for profit. And counter-recruitment is the most important thing that a peace movement can do. Maybe not an anti-war movement, but a peace movement must stop our children from falling into the hands of the evil war profiteers, the ones who only look at our children as cannon fodder and not as human beings. And thank you. Thank you. Lock your kids up. If there's a draft, lock your kids up, hide them, take them to Canada. Do not let them fall into the hands of the people who only will misuse them. They don't love our children like we do. They don't teach them that violence is wrong. They don't teach them that kicking and hitting and punching and biting and calling names is wrong. They teach them that it's right to kill. They teach them that it's right to kill children. They teach them that about the enemy. So they take our children and they transform them into something that we don't even know anymore. And that's why I said earlier, peace does not trickle down. We know what trickles down. They always say crap rolls downhill. And we've been getting crapped on now for about 7 years. Peace starts at home. Peace starts in our communities. Peace starts in our regions. And we have to make sure that that peace trickles up. And that we shut down the war machine. We run candidates against every enabler of the Bush regime. And we say, no, it's not okay. It's not okay to support this murderous status quo. It's wrong. It's not okay to give George Bush any more money for war. It's not okay to let him spy on Americans without getting the proper wiretap. It's not okay for them to detain our brothers and sisters in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and torture them. It's not okay to bomb Iran. It's not okay to take away our rights of habeas corpus. It's not okay to detain us without our due process. And you know what? I'm getting so tired of having to put my liquids in a plastic bag. You know, just because I don't have my liquids in a plastic bag does not give you reasonable cause to think that I'm a terrorist. Come on, let's put on our thinking caps. If I have to throw away one more tube of toothpaste, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to go crazy, I think. And when they tell me that my son died for freedom, and freedom isn't free, first of all, freedom is free. That's why they call it freedom. You know, they don't call it expensive dumb, it's freedom. And I feel sorry for a person who thinks that they're more free just because my son is in the grave. Freedom is free. But when they say that my son died for freedom and that that's why we're over there, how come all of our rights, most of our rights, many of our rights have been taken away here at home? How come our children, when they volunteer for the military, if they don't want to go and die for the war machine and the corporations and for greed, to line George Bush and Dick Cheney's pockets and their buddies' pockets, how come they can't unvolunteer? Has anyone here belonged to a volunteer organization where you just couldn't walk away without going to prison? I think we all have, and we've all belonged to volunteer organizations that we didn't have time to work with anymore. We started to disagree with their mission. So let's start turning their rhetoric back on them. Okay, if it's a all-volunteer organization, then when Casey wants to get out and not go to Iraq, he can get out and not go to Iraq. That he doesn't have to follow a commander-in-chief that went AWOL from the Alabama Air National Guard. He doesn't have to follow a vice commander-in-chief that got 5 deferments. And we don't care if they got deferments, and if there's any Vietnam resistor here, we honor you. We wanted all of you to get out of that war. But you don't go into power and send your troops off into another war, another bullshit war. I'm going to be the only person in Congress that says bullshit and has tattoos and has been arrested 8 times. Yes. But you know they all say it. They all say it. So what are we going to do? You know, the White House-generated Petraeus report's coming out Monday. It's going to say the surge is working against all evidence to the contrary. They're going to say that sectarian violence is down 75% without saying that they redefined what sectarian violence is. That if you get shot in the back of the head, that's sectarian violence. In the front, that's murder. Murder's way up in Iraq, but sectarian violence is down. Dick Cheney would love nothing better than to start dropping bombs on Iran. And you see the rhetoric. Everything's Iran's fault now. You know, price of gas goes up, it's Iran's fault. You know, there's a hurricane in the Gulf, it's Iran's fault. Everything's Iran's fault now. So what are we going to do, people? Are we going to sit here and let them kill more of our brothers and sisters? Are we going to let George Bush and Dick Cheney walk away from the White House and what George Bush wants to do? He wants to make money by speeches. You know, he wants to live a nice life like Richard Nixon did, like McNamara did, like Johnson did, like Kissinger is still alive and advising George Bush. We cannot let them walk away, because if we want true and lasting peace, there has to be accountability for our war criminals too. And I promise you, I'm not going to say if I get elected or I hope I get elected, because I think that puts negative energy in the universe. When I get elected, I will be a congresswoman for 2 weeks while George Bush is still president, and that's going to be the worst 2 weeks of his life. And if he's not impeached by then, I will every day go on the floor and introduce resolutions of impeachment. I will talk to everybody I can about impeachment. I'll travel the world and speak to world leaders and say, you have to indict them for war crimes. And you know what? I'm going to be 98 like Granny D, and I'm going to be holding a picture of my son wherever George Bush goes, and I'm going to say, you killed my son. And I'm never going to let you forget this. And we cannot let it happen again. So many, like I said, of our children and Vietnamese people were killed. And it is happening again. It's another Vietnam. I know George Bush spent so much time saying no, now he says it is. And if we leave, it's only going to encourage Osama bin Laden because it's like another Vietnam. No. Ending the occupation, making sure everybody in the Middle East is treated fairly, not just a certain peoples in the Middle East, but everybody is treated fairly. Removing our troops, removing the war machine, removing the independent contractors. That's going to go a long way to stopping terrorism all over the world. So we can't let it happen again. I have 3 living children, and I hope to be a grandmother. And I don't want my grandchildren to die in another war. We can never, ever let this happen again, but it's going to keep happening if we let this two-party system we have keep on being corrupt, keep on voting for war, keep on waging the wars. Almost every war in the last 100 years has been started by a Democrat. So, we can't let either party off the hook. And it's going to keep happening if we keep giving our children to them to kill. And another thing is, Jeremy Scahill is right spot on. If they have 180,000 mercenary killers in Iraq, they don't need a military. They have already their paid killers. And when I go to Congress, I will stop that also. So we had an anti-war movement in Vietnam. That war was stopped. We're back again here. My son is dead. Almost 4,000 Americans. Over 1 million Iraqis this time. We have an anti-war movement now. Hopefully we'll stop the occupation of Iraq sooner than we did Vietnam. But if we don't change into a peace movement and work for an equality of resources and living for everybody in the world, I can guarantee you in 10 to 12 years we'll be in another war killing other children. So if that's one thing you take home for today, is that we have to make sure that this never, ever happens again. And the only way we can do that is calling ourselves peace activists, working for peace and not being anti-war activists. And that peace encompasses so much more than just no war. So I just want to say again how much I love being here, how much I love beer and cheese, how much I love all of you, and I'll be signing books over there in that place there. So and I hope you guys invite me back. It's been wonderful. Thank you.